Hello and welcome to the Bits of Good Bootcamp. I just want to take a couple minutes here to go over HTTP request methods and status codes. So this is something that at this point in the course you might have seen a little bit, but I don't know that we've really gone through it in depth, so I'm just going to take a couple minutes to do that. Basically, let's start with requests. And HTTP requests can take multiple forms. For example, when I go to this URL and I load this URL, I am making a GET request to this URL. GETs are probably the most common type of HTTP requests that you will use in your everyday life. And just in general, they're very popular in applications because oftentimes you need to get data. And that's really what a GET request does. So you can see here, the GET request goes to a server and is requesting some information. That is the very basics of a GET request. The important thing to note here is that when you're making a GET request, you aren't changing anything on the database. You are just asking for data. The next type of request that I want to talk about is a POST request. And a POST request is different than a GET request because a POST request implies that you are changing something on the server. Most commonly, it means that you are creating something new on the server. So for example, when you submit a form and you are creating a new to-do item, for example, if you have a to-do application, when you submit a to-do to add to your list, that is being carried by a POST request. And so the data is inside of the POST request, and that is being used on the server to create a new piece of data. The next thing I want to talk about is a delete. This is pretty simple. It's exactly what it sounds like. When you send a delete, you are sending a request to the server to delete some piece of information on the server. So at this point, we've covered creating, which is POST, reading, which is GET, and deleting, which is delete. And then the final part that we need to cover is updating. And updating can take place using two forms. You can either use a PUT request or a patch request. And the difference between the two is that a PUT request needs you to send the complete object that you want to update. This means that if you have a data object that has, say, 5 fields, you need to send a data object in this PUT request that has all 5 fields. Even if you're only changing one field, the data that you send in this PUT request needs to contain all of the fields in the data object. And the reason why is because a PUT request, what it does is it takes the data that the user sends and uses it to replace the information that's in the database already. Now this, we can contrast it with the patch request, and what the patch request does is it's also used for updating, but you don't have to send the entire object. Instead, if you have a data object that has 5 fields and you only need to update one field, you can just send an object with the one field updated, and then the patch request will get the proper resource from the server and then update just that one field and leave the rest the same. So that's the difference between PUT and patch. For the next project that you're going to do, we're going to use patch just because it's a little bit simpler to only send the information that you want to update versus sending all the information even if you're not updating it. The next thing I want to talk about really quick are status codes. So this is the other side of HTTP requests. And what status codes let us know is whether a request was successful or not, basically. And so we have 5 general categories of status codes. We have the 100s, the 200s, the 300s, the 400s, and the 500s. In general, 100s are just informational. These aren't things that we use very often. Now 200s are kind of our bread and butter. This is what we're looking for, and this just means that our request was successful. And then there's some specific designations here about, for example, a 201 means that a resource was created, or a 202 is accepted. There's lots of different things here, but in general, we just know that a 200 was good. That means that our request executed successfully. 300s tell us that our request was redirected to some other endpoint on the server or outside of the server. And so again, there's lots of specific ones here. It's not just 300. You can have everything up to a 308. But in general, suffice it to say that 300s are redirection status codes. Now 400s are kind of our worst nightmare, and that means that we did something wrong. When you get a 400 error, it means that you as the client did something wrong that caused an error on the server. The important thing to blame here is that, or the important thing to notice is that the blame falls on the client, okay? This isn't something went wrong on the server, it's something that you sent the server was wrong. Okay, so for example, we have a bad request. So if you try to post to a database or to a server and it tries to create something in the database, but you don't include all the fields, you might get a 400 back. And of course, we have everybody's favorite, the 404 not found, which means that you requested some piece of information that was not valid, that was not found on the server, or that you didn't have access to on the server. And then finally, we have our 500 status codes. And what these mean is that something went wrong on the server. This means that you didn't necessarily do anything wrong, but that the server experienced some kind of error and was not able to complete your request. So 500 errors, you're kind of out of luck for the most part. It means that there's something wrong with the server or the service you're using. It's not necessarily anything wrong with you. So using these status codes can be really good. It allows you, when you're consuming APIs, to understand if your requests were successful or not, and if not, why. And also, as an API developer, when you're working on back-end code, it's really good to use these status codes when you're sending responses because it gives insights to the front-end clients about what happened. I also want to pull your attention here really quick. One of the best status codes is a 418, which is I'm a teapot. This is a real status code. It was defined in 1998, and it just is a status code that you send back if you are a teapot and cannot execute the request. And at the very end here, I want to notice that also in the HTTP requests, there's some things that we didn't talk about, like head, connect, options, trace. These are kind of like more informational things that you don't really need to worry about, which is why I didn't cover them. You can read up on them on your own later if you're interested. Alright guys, that's everything for HTTP request methods and status codes.